ready? Do you think we're ready? What are we doing here? Okay, somebody told me there'd be pie. I don't know. Let's start this thing. Hi, I'm GC Myers. That's Gary actually, but I do use the GC for my work. First thing out of the gate, let me welcome you to today's virtual gallery talk. We're streaming from the West End Gallery and historic Market Street in beautiful Corning, gateway to the Finger Lakes. Thank you for taking a little time out of your busy lives to spend a little time with us here at the gallery. This is, as I said, the first virtual talk that I, or for that matter, the gallery has attempted. And we're going to try to do our very best to make this talk go off with as few glitches as possible. We're going to try to keep it under 100 at least. We'll see. To that end, Jesse and Linda and John are over there. They're standing by. They're taking care of all the technical details, running the comments in the chat and all that kind of stuff. Plus, they've got a fire extinguisher and a cattle prod over there for those times when I get stuck, they can zap me. But we're going to try to keep that to a minimum too. Here's a little reminder. If you have any questions or comments, they're fine as well. During the first part of this talk, you'll be muted. Well, I should say, during the first part of this talk, you're going to be muted. But you can go to the chat section and you can type in a question. You can raise your hand. There's a button for that to make sure it gets noticed. If you're on a PC, the chat button should be at the bottom in the middle of the Zoom toolbar. On a mobile device, you probably have to go to the bottom right and click on where it says more. Quite honestly, I wasn't sure we'd be doing any kind of a gallery talk this year, or even a gallery show for that matter. It's been a year where putting on a regular exhibit presents a whole new set of challenges for any gallery. To their credit, Jesse and Lynn have done an incredible job in keeping the gallery safe as is humanly possible, while still making it look pretty effortless, even graceful. If you folks were here, I'd ask you to turn around and give them a hand. They certainly deserve it. But I guess we're not going to be able to do that this year. That's, one of the things we're losing, being able to give somebody a nice round of applause. It's one of the sacrifices we're going to make this year. And, doing this as a virtual event. Close human interaction and reaction has been kind of lost for the time being, or at least changed in some weird way that I'm still trying to adapt to. We probably all are, but we'll make do. Like they say, when life gives you rotten eggs, make lemonade. Wait, see, I'm gonna miss that part. See, that was what we call a joke. If you would have laughed normally at that point, and as it is now, it's just dead silent in here. Maybe I didn't have the saying right. Maybe it's when life gives you lemon, open up the gin. Maybe they don't say that either. I'm easily confused, but you get the idea. I do know that I am going to miss the interaction with you guys this year. Not seeing your faces and your reactions really takes away some of the fun of doing this for me. Like I say, I'm going to miss the laughter. Being a virtual wise ass is not nearly as much fun as being one in person. But we're going to see how it goes. What's the worst that could happen? Normally, I start the talk by kind of looking around the gallery and taking in the faces, seeing who's there, who I know, new faces and old friends. See how everyone seems to be at that moment, getting a temperature on the room. It's obviously a little tougher this year because I can't really see you, and I'm basically talking to the corner of my phone where the camera's located. When I was practicing, and believe it or not, I did practice this, I had an image of three faces taped above my camera. So I would know where I was talking. I would talk to that. And it also helped me remember to look at the camera. And it reminded me that there were people out there, that there were real faces out there listening, as I hope you are still. They were just stock faces. I didn't know their names, just faces. But they seemed nice and they served their purpose. Here's how this is going to go. I'm going to talk for a short while, 15 or 20 minutes, maybe 20 or 25 minutes, or 4 or 5 if I run out of gas. If you see me drinking a lot from my water bottle, you'll know I'm at a loss for words, or if you see me walk off camera, I usually come back, usually. But I'm going to start with a little talk, and then maybe we'll take a stroll around the gallery, and I'll show you some of the work from this show. Talk about some of the paintings, tell some stories, maybe a few lies here and there, just to keep you on your toes. While I'm talking, you can submit questions and comments, and as I mentioned before, if we can open the floor. At this point, it'll probably be written conversation, the questions will be relayed to me. I don't know that we're going to be able to actually talk face to face, but we'll see. Any questions? I also have some questions that came in beforehand that I'll get to, and any questions that you submit, that you put in, if I don't get to them, I will get back to you ASAP via email. So that sounds like a plan. Okay. I'm going to have a drink and then we're going to get going. Let's get this thing off the ground. Are you ready? We're going to start by talking about the show that's here right now, hanging at the West End Gallery. I've been showing my work here since February of 1995, so it's been over 25 years now, about 25 and a half years here at the West End. There's a story about how I started showing here that I've told umpteen times over the years. Many of you have heard it many, many times. If some of you don't know it, remind me and I will retell it during the Q&A session. I've added some new details for the folks who heard it before. There might be an alien abduction, I'm not sure. I won't know until I start talking. But like I said, I've been here at the West End for well over 25 years now, and I'm pretty sure this is my 18th solo show here. For several years early on, I was in a number of 2- and 3-person shows here. With its proximity and my history with it, the West End's been what I would call my home gallery for all that time. 25 good years, really. Every year for the past 18 years, I've done a July show, and this year we managed to put one on, the pandemic be damned. This year's show is titled From a Distance. It's obviously a reference to the current situation with all the restrictions from the pandemic. Quarantines and social distancing seem to pretty much taken center stage. Pretty much everyone is feeling some sense of isolation, some sort of distancing. There's definitely a space between us. For many folks, this distance feels like an unbearable burden, and I understand that. I get that. I mean, we want to be together. We want to see the faces of people we know. We want to shake hands and hug one another, and it's what we do. So you can see that the idea of using a title like From a Distance, one that pointed to this feeling of separation from others, made sense this year for most folks. But quite honestly, it's a title that I might have chosen in any other year. You see, being alone, being in some form of solitude has long been a normal state of being for me, maybe even a preferred state of being. I've always been kind of a social distancer, I guess you could say, early adapter. I was born, bred, and raised for at least some form of isolation. Uh, I had a lot of time alone as a kid, and that really set the stage for the life I live now. It made me understand the freedom that comes with solitude, uh, the freedom that it gives you to think, to let your mind wander, the freedom to imagine and daydream, uh, the freedom to choose your own way. Growing up, we lived in the country in an old farmhouse with no neighbors in sight. The place played a big part in shaping me. It had a big old barn behind it, and behind that there was a steep tree-covered hillside. And as a kid, I spent a ton of time wandering on that hillside as the terrain and the trees became backdrops for all sorts of adventures. Down trees became sailing ships, and I was usually a pirate, a buccaneer. There was one tree that was my favorite. It was an old oak with this big wide trunk that made a perfect ship's deck. It was, nice and flat and just long. It was big enough that I had to work really hard to climb on top of it. Well, I was much smaller than I was only like this tall, so maybe it wasn't that big, but it really didn't matter because in my mind, in my imagination, it was 100-foot pirate ship, and I was always sailing the Spanish Main, almost always. Well, and I was always alone. Uh, Between these imaginary voyages, I read a lot, and reading uh, opened up the world for me. It took me to places and introduced me to people that weren't part of my world. They weren't part of my life. Uh, it put me in different situations, strange situations, and it introduced me to wonders and dangers unknown to me before. Uh, Plus, reading taught me the lessons that I might not have been able to get that were lacking in my own world. Things like empathy, probably empathy more than anything. Reading by its very nature often tells a story by putting you in the place of the the storyteller. First person narratives, for example, are basically that. Uh, Reading made me try to look at situations from the viewpoint of someone other than myself. How would I act if I were that person in that book, in that situation? But beyond empathy, this time by myself as a kid taught me the lesson of aloneness. Aloneness. It showed me how to feel comfortable in my solitude. And it turns out that this ability to be alone, this willingness to be alone, it's a vital necessity for becoming an artist. I didn't know that at the time, of course. The idea of being an artist was a totally foreign concept. But over the years, as I began to understand that being an artist wasn't out of the realm of possibility, I began to see that how valuable this ability to be alone was, especially to an artist. That's a huge positive. Most people look at it as a negative, but for an artist, it's actually a positive. I can't imagine that they tell that to people in art school. Is this need to tolerate being alone is something I think people in the know probably want to keep as a secret because it seems kind of scary to a lot of people, almost antisocial. And I mean, we are, after all, social creatures for the most part. A lot of the things in our lives take group efforts, conquering worlds, assembling armies, going to the moon, building bridges and planes and ships and skyscrapers, finding a vaccine. They're all group efforts. But and so the conquest of the physical world through these group efforts, they're definitely important, and they are social efforts. But as momentous as conquering the outside world is to us, the conquest of the inner world is equally as important. Um, while the outer world deals with the where and the how of us as a people, the physical bones and structure of the world, the inner world reveals the who that we are and the why We are who we are. And like it or not, it's exclusively a solo journey. But even so, it's anything but antisocial. You see, it's a solo trek, an adventure made for one that has to be made. It has to be made so that we can make the outer world a more tolerable place in which to live. It makes the world a more human place to live. And though not everyone follows the path of the artist, it actually involves all of us in some way. It comes back to each and every one of us. It's something we all ultimately are connected with. And that's mainly because at some point, we all experience aloneness. Aloneness is the great common denominator. It's the single trait that we all share, even though we try like hell to avoid it. Some people can't spend a moment alone, and most of us don't want to even acknowledge it. But being alone is part of who we are. It's part of our makeup. And you see it mainly in the most important times of our existence. Birth, for example. There we are, we're perfectly alone, floating calmly around in the womb, warm and content. Then all of a sudden, in a rush of fluids, flesh, and light, we emerge into the outer world. You might even have somebody there, a nurse or a doctor, slapping you on the ass. Now, your mothers and the mothers out there, right now are probably not going to agree with this. And I certainly understand that. But we all make that journey alone into the world. We're born alone. And at the other end of the spectrum, it's the same with our journey into death. No one can truly tell us with any real knowledge, with any degree of certainty, where or how we may go after life has left our bodies. They can't explain how we would travel into that next phase of our existence, nor can they go along with us. They cannot accompany us. We go it alone. We have to. And beyond birth and death, there's the aloneness of sorrow and grief. Nobody truly knows the secret depth of someone else's grief and sorrow. They can't, because it's ours alone. We carry it alone. You can even point to deep love as being something we carry alone. So there you go. You got birth, death, sorrow, and love. The big moments in life, and we go it alone. And only we know what it is for ourselves. And that's where the artist comes in. They're used to going it alone. They're used to traveling alone. They're used to going down those secret inner paths by themselves. They go deep into themselves and they seek that inner aloneness and everything that it goes along with it. They go so far, they cultivate it, they harvest it, and eventually they bring it back and they share it with others. And maybe that's the purpose of the artist, to bring back that sense of being alone to those of us who avoid it or who've just plain forgotten it. On my best days in the studio, I experience all of these phases of aloneness, that sense of birth and death, beginnings and endings, the pain of deep sorrow and the aching and longing that comes with deep love. Those are the days when I feel like I'm seeing through the eyes of both a newborn baby and the eyes of a dying man. When I feel like I'm in the throes of being madly in love and in the depths of despair at the same time from losing it all at the same time. And you heard me right, though. I said that those are my best days in the studio. They make this whole effort, this trying to live as an artist, worthwhile for me. They're the best days. I say that because on those days, even though I'm experiencing the depths of aloneness, I feel closer to humanity, more connected to the human race than in any other time. I feel absolutely fortunate on those days. I feel like I have some purpose in this world that I get to share these days with others through my work. I know that sounds funny, that I feel good because I get to share my deep aloneness with you, but think about it. How we experience, how we see, how we feel art is another one of those things that is ours alone. When you're looking at a piece of art, and I'm using the visual definition here, it could be music or dance or film or any other discipline. But in this case, when you're looking at art, it's through your eyes, your experiences in the world, your sensibilities, your joys and dislikes. Nobody can tell you how to feel about art. It has to speak to your own sense of aloneness. And then I think that's what real art does. It reaches out and lets you know that this is who you are, that this is what you are. And it tells you that someone else recognizes that and knows, at least in some small way, that same sense of aloneness. It lets you know that in a universe of aloneness, in a world where we enter and leave alone, that you're ultimately not alone. It might be called an understanding. And that's art. At least that's how I see it. Well, then it has to match your sofa, but I'm just kidding, of course. Now, what I just said about experiencing the different forms of aloneness in the day is it's a pretty big look into my process, how I view how things come about for me. I use it as an indicator of my readiness for a show. For me, because I'm emotion-based, there's like a threshold that I have to come to. It's not, I can't just sit down and produce work. There's got to be some kind of emotional connection there. And I know for this show, that was the case. You see, I've done 50 plus solo shows through the years. And I can always tell if and when I'm fully emotionally invested in the work. It's not something I want to freely admit, but since I try to be as transparent and as honest in these talks as I can, it usually comes to me in the form of being easily moved to tears. When I find that, when I find myself on that bare, jagged edge, that threshold, and that's how I describe it, where I'm easily emotionally affected by simple words and phrases and images, sounds and rhythms, gestures and movement. It's at that point that I know I'm ready, that the work is ready to flow. Now, this year's shows, both here at the West End and my annual show at the Principal Gallery in Alexandria, Virginia, were not easy in that aspect. It took some time to get to that emotional threshold that I look for, that I depend on. It didn't come at first. And this was frustrating and even a little worrisome. It just bugged me. And it bugged me because in this year of all years, it would have seemed like it would have been exceedingly easy to find something to cry about. I mean, look at it. Every new day this year, we've had some new revelation, something new shocking us, of confounding us, of angering us, of making us plain crazy with anxiety and fear. I want to cry right now just thinking about that. But after some time fighting this, I realized, I fought it, I agonized over it. I realized that this was actually the problem that was stifling that emotional threshold I was needing for my work. What I mean is, the problems of the outer world were so dramatic and dark that I wasn't easily able to go deep inside where I needed to go. The outer was keeping me from the inner, and why wouldn't it? artists often think they should be fixing things, or at least empowering and inspiring change. There's a there's a compulsion of some sort that comes with being an artist. They have a need to make things line up properly. They need to make the outer world align with their inner vision of that outer world. And I think this comes from the fact that they often spend a lot of their time just watching things. Most artists are good observers in some way. They usually grow up watching and noting others. I know I did. And as they watch, they sometimes begin to notice rhythms and patterns in the world, patterns of behavior, patterns of reaction, cause and effect. They can sometimes see where things are going before others. You often see this come to fruition with sci-fi writers who sometimes seem downright prescient in their vision for the future. The late Octavia Butler wrote a book, The Parable of the Sower. She wrote this 28 years ago. I think it was 92 or 3. And it takes place in this country just a couple of years from now, I think in 2024. And the country is every bit as broken as you might imagine. It's pretty alarming how relevant her vision from the past feels at this moment, 27 years later. It sure feels like she saw some kind of pattern and could imagine it forward. And seeing this, she wanted to fix it. She wanted to warn us. And maybe this compulsion to fix the world comes from that people like her and other artists, they operate from that same emotional threshold, the one I've been describing. They feel things deeply and they respond strongly. There are problems with that, of course. You know, it's not an ideal. It's the best of the world and the worst of the world. Sometimes creates this sense of responsibility, one that seems almost irrational at times. A couple of years ago, I talked about something I'd read about Virginia Woolf, where she talked about 3 exceptional incidents she'd had as a young girl that drove her to want to be an artist, a writer in her case. 2 were awful incidents. One was a beating given to her from her brother. He was beating her, and at one point she was ready to raise her hand and fight back, and she just stopped and allowed him to beat her. And the other was the suicide of a neighbor. These incidents made her feel hopelessly sad. She felt just a deep despair. The world seemed broken to her, beyond repair. But the third incident, excuse me, I'm going to have a little drink. I'm not used to talking this much, believe me. But the third thing, the third incident was a really simple thing. She noticed a flower outside the door of her family's home, and she looked at it and she studied it, and she saw its connection to everything in the world, the soil, the sky, the air. It grew down into the ground and it reached up for the sky. And there was this wholeness to it that she could see. It had, the way she put it was, it had a reason to be. It had this reason where the other 2 incidents had none. The awful incidents showed her then that the pattern of the world is damaged and needs to be repaired. And the flower showed her that there was indeed the potential for repair. And she knew from this simple revelation that her purpose was to somehow make the world whole in whatever way she could as herself, to either repair it or at least point out where the pattern of the world is damaged and where it needs to be repaired. I'm sure there are composers and choreographers, filmmakers and sculptors and all sorts of artists out there who can relate to that, and plenty of non-artists as well. Doctors and therapists and surrogates and advocates, for example, who all have the same sense of needing to repair the world. Something drives them want to make the world whole again. Now, for Virginia Woolf, it was writing. For me, in my own small way, it's painting. This is my attempt at making the world whole. Even then, I might be deluded in that. That might be some kind of grandiose thought. I could just be the crazy guy in the forest smearing paint on canvas or a board for a living. And if that's the case, so long as I believe that it's my purpose, I can live with that. There are worse things in this world than being the crazy guy alone in the woods with a paintbrush in his hand. In the words of John Prine, who died from COVID-19, by the way, I ain't hurting nobody, I ain't hurting no one. I'm going to end this section of the talk with a James Baldwin quote that pretty much sums up what we've been talking about so far. It's from an essay he wrote in the early 60s on the creative process. He said, an artist is a sort of emotional or spiritual historian. His role is to make you realize the doom and glory of knowing who you are and what you are. He has to tell, because nobody else in the world can tell what it is to be alive. All I've ever wanted to do is tell that I'm not trying to solve anybody's problems, not even my own. I'm just trying to outline what the problems are. I want to be stretched, shook up, to overreach myself and to make you feel that way too. I think those are pretty good targets for any artist. Well, I want to stop for just a second here and just say, I hope you see the optimistic part of that. Taken wrong, that is actually an optimistic viewpoint of the artist's purpose and journey. Okay, that ends the main section. That's my theme for the talk. That being said, we're going to take a little stroll around the gallery if you're ready for that. We're going to look at some of the work in the show. First painting that we're going to be looking at here is Angel's Reach. This is it's a little different look for me, even though it has my typical red trees. For those of you who didn't know that, I tend to paint a lot of red trees. That's probably news to some of you. This is something we don't really get to do at the gallery talks. I get to get up real close and show you some of the work. This was a piece that I really enjoyed painting in the studio. I loved living with this piece. It had a just great color, and it kind of goes back to the Virginia Woolf story. Those trees seem to be reaching upward. You know, when I first painted it, I kind of viewed them as these kind of spiritual watchers looking down over that house and the other houses. But I don't see them looking down. I see them reaching up now. And I think that's, you know, where the title Angel's Reach came from. Moving over here, this is Graveyard Shift. Oops. This is kind of a little bit different work for me. I enjoy doing this work. It's almost a kind of a palate cleanser. You clean your mind out, and you're basically, the buildings are like putting together a puzzle of sorts. You're just building it up And I thought with the what we were going through, it was a fitting piece. There's a sense of lights are on, but nobody's at home there. Now, this piece is called Faraway Eyes. This is a kind of a throwback to my earlier work. Like I said, over here, this work is what I call additive work. It basically starts with a dark surface, and I add layers and layers of color on top of that. You know, I'm building from dark out to light. This earlier work starts, this is the work that I trained myself to paint early on, starts with a white surface. And you put on layers of dark colors and you pull color off the surface. And it kind of reveals itself that way. Now, this is going to be interesting. Let's see how well this shows. Actually, here you can actually see I used basically a chalk pencil to outline the clouds in the sky, and I hope that's showing up well. And next to it is a piece called Working to Stillness. It's again, it's also a throwback to my earlier work. Has, as you can see, the exposed edges. You'll notice that, I hope I'm not moving too fast, and I apologize if I am. And over here, we've got one of my wind pieces. A friend of mine out there, I know, Deb, I know you like this piece, or this style of work, maybe not this piece in particular, but it's I always enjoy doing the wind pieces. There's a freedom in working with that style, with the free, you know, the leaves coming off the tree, and you know, that sense of motion that it creates. And motion is, even though there's a lot of stillness in the work, trying to capture motion is actually really important. Now, this is probably the piece that was most about the current situation. It's called In These Times. I know we're getting a little glare here, but I just wanted to show you the, you know, the sky, give you a close-up of the sky. Now, you know, people that have come to the talks before or taken my workshops know the skies, especially on these additive pieces, have a lot of different layers of color. There are layers underneath this that I probably could skip, but they're there. There are violets and golds and reds and blues, and they all contribute to the depth of the color. And for me, that's important. And for me, it's kind of important just knowing that they're there. Now, I'm gonna swing around this way. Okay, we're gonna walk up this way, and I want to show you how I prep. I want to show you a prepared canvas. Okay, let's see. This is the surface that I normally start working with. This is a canvas. It's had multiple layers of gesso put on over several days. I'm going to ask Jess, is that showing up okay? Yeah. You're able to, you're getting a little, actually the shadow's actually helping a little bit. You can see some of the texture. As I say, I put the gesso on in a number of different ways with brushes. I squirt it on, drip it on, run my fingers through it. The whole idea is to create a surface that has a texture and almost sculptural quality beforehand. It has visual interest before I put any paint on it. I've told this story a number of times, and I apologize to the folks who've been to the gallery talks in the past, but there was a piece many years ago that I prepped the canvas, and I liked the texture so much, and it had this great unity to it. It was almost too beautiful to paint. And it sat in my studio for 6, 7 months. And every day I would come in the studio and I would walk around it and I would look at it and I'd go, is this going to be the day? And I was afraid to paint it. I only figured that I could only screw it up. And one day I went at it, and I realized at that point that it was so strong that it was going to carry me. And so now when I have strong visual impact coming off the canvas before I start painting, I'm not afraid anymore. I'm actually excited because I know that it's going to make me look good eventually. Now this piece, let's see if I can, oops, sorry about that, folks. I'm working here. There we go. This is another favorite from the show. This is a connubialis, which kind of sounds like connubial bliss. And that's basically what it means. It's what I consider one of my Baucis and Philemon paintings. Philemon? Philem. I never can pronounce that. I can say Baucis, but Philemon. Okay. Basically, it's based on the Greek myth, and I've told this story a lot too over the years. I had a couple who had me do a commission piece about I think it was 10 years ago for their 10th anniversary, and they, told me they wanted a piece based on that myth, and this was how I came up. This is what I came up with these twisted trees, 2 separate trees growing from approximately the same trunk. And the Greek myth is, it tells the story of Zeus and Mercury traveling incognito, and they're dressed as beggars, and they come to this village, and they go from town to door to door and ask for alms, and at every house they're turned rudely away, and Zeus is getting angrier and angrier by the minute, and he's ready to devastate the village, as gods are willing, they often do. And they came to the edge of town, to the poorest house in town, and it was the house of Baucis and Philemon, and they were this old couple. They'd been married for a long time. They were very poor, and when they knocked, Zeus and Mercury dressed as beggars. They open the door and let them in. And they basically opened their house to them. They even offered to kill their pet goose to, serve them dinner. And Zeus was so moved that he spared their lives when he decimated the village and flooded it and killed everyone. And he also gave them 2 wishes, and their wishes were that they would remain together working in the temple that rose from the village after the flood, and that after they died, that they would die together, and they would always be together after death. And when they died within moments of each other. They were buried on this hillside, and they grew as an oak and a linden tree from the same trunk. And well, it's a nice story. There is one of the red chair pieces. This one is called the Timeout. The red chair is one of my icons. The red tree is one of my more recognizable icons. The red roof and the red chair also. This is this is from a distance. This is the title piece for the current show. I would call these probably the more optimistic pieces in the show. They kind of go back to the concept that we have wealth around us all the time, beauty all the time. And so often we're tempted to go to great distances far away to seek our fortune in other places, when in fact, what we're looking for is often easily within reach. Okay. This is a personal favorite. This is Night Comes On. It's named after one of my favorite Leonard Cohen songs. And there's just something about that sky that I just really like. People, I'm sure there are people out there who are going to ask me what my favorite pieces are. And I've often said that it's kind of like asking somebody who their favorite kid is. And, every piece in here has something that I like, that has meaning for me. Some you can see it more obviously, and I think this piece probably has it more obvious, but that's my personal take on that. Now, these broken sky pieces, I really enjoy painting these pieces. They're some of my favorite pieces to work on. You're always excuse me. It's kind of an unusual process because the surface is completely covered in this dark. In this case, it's like a dark blue. Let's move over to this piece, if I can show it properly. And this piece is called A Time of Reckoning. This piece over here is the anticipation. This probably is it's both a dark piece, but at the same time, it has a sense of optimism to it. And I think that's one of the things that I really like about this piece. It's as I said, it's called a time of reckoning, and reckonings are often very difficult, and they hurt while they're taking place. But you know, once change has been affected, you realize that it's worth the effort, and I think that's what I'm seeing in this piece. And that's called With Sanction of the Moon, another one of the Baucis and Philemon pieces. And over here we have some of the, these are basically painted in a process that as I say, I taught myself to work in when I first began painting. This piece is called Center of Gravity, and I'm getting a little shadow on that, but I hope these are showing up okay. And this is World of Wonder, and that's again, this is I think this is probably one of the more optimistic pieces in the show. It has a excuse me, sorry. Well, it's hard. This piece right now is difficult to show you the texture on it. It's has great texture in it that I really like. I'm going to show you just a few more pieces, and then I think we're going to go to some questions. There's John Manning. There's Jesse. This is one of the paintings that we are giving away. This is, and that is Magistrum. We'll be doing that drawing. Over here, we have Night Nirvana, another favorite of mine. This piece goes back to something that Joseph Campbell talked about, how nirvana is often achieved by getting rid of greed and desire and those types of longings in yourself. When you become free of the need to have things, do things for other people, when you're just basically free, it goes back to the aloneness that we were talking about earlier. And I think this is probably one of the pieces that best illustrates that piece. And this piece is called Good Neighbor Policy. I enjoy the painting the this is kind of a, this is called Carried Across. And I enjoy painting the broken skies. I think it goes back to when I first began painting. I painted these wet paintings that I could only paint small paintings. You know, my bigger pieces were only 5 or 6 inches square. And I had a breakthrough commission from Corning Inc. And they wanted large pieces. And they asked me if I could do it, and I said, sure. And I didn't know, at that point, I didn't have the dexterity as an artist to be able to paint large puddles of paint properly. And I guess that's the way I would put it. I know I've had artist friends who call them puddle paintings that I do. And But I got around that by constructing these paintings out of small blocks of color. And I basically built them as like building blocks. And I don't have to do that now. But I got so used to that look. Now there's one of the pre-submitted questions asked about just this. This is from John McDowell in Moline, Illinois. Hi, John. How you doing? Say hey to Hank for me. This piece, what John wanted to know, he wanted to know how if I was inspired at all by stained glass in doing these, because it definitely has a stained glass appearance. And he asked how I get that kind of that luminous quality with the light coming through. I can't say that, like I set out to paint or, replicate stained glass, but I will say that translucency and luminous quality is something that I did want. I remember reading about J.M.W. Turner, how he would scrape his paper so that, and he would sometimes even backlight paintings so that the light would come through. And when I first started, that's what I wanted to create. I wanted to create a luminous quality. Now, that being said, I've always loved stained glass and have marveled at it over the years. And, so maybe it's a yes or no answer on that one. This piece is called Tempus Quietus. And I think this is probably one of the calmest, sorry, my upstate accent shined through right there. In maybe one of the most peaceful pieces in the show. I'm not saying that there isn't peacefulness in many of the pieces, but that piece, for me, just has a pacifying effect. And that's Solemn Light. And this piece, this is a personal favorite, just because I was watching Mary Poppins when I painted it. And it's called Let's Go Fly a Kite. It's just I'm gonna answer some questions. First, I'm gonna start with the first ones that came in yesterday. Hopefully I will do justice to these questions. Hopefully I won't stammer too much. This is from Dave Arnold down in, I think it was Roanoke. Dave asked, he mentioned I had written on the blog before about my admiration of Grant Wood, how he had influenced a lot of my landscapes. And, Dave pointed out that he had never really knew much about Grant Wood beyond American Gothic, the piece with the two people sitting out in front. And, after looking at the Grant Wood, more of the work, he understood more about why I admired him. But he mentioned in his question and interview that Grant Wood's sister, who is the model in America, the woman in American Gothic, and she talked about Grant Wood's process and how often he would paint for his paintings would take a very long time to complete. And she said he did a lot of planning for his paintings, and sometimes paintings would take 6 months to complete. And he wanted to know if that was because it was portraiture. And I'm not a portrait painter, but I would have to say, no, that's not the reason that it took longer to paint. It was probably just the way his process. Every painter works with a different process. And for instance, another one of my favorites, Thomas Hart Benton. If you go into the Smithsonian, the Museum of American Painting, not on the mall, off the mall, there's a huge mural that Thomas Hart Benton did for a department store, I think in St. Louis. And there's a great video on YouTube outlining his process. And it's amazing because I watched and I was just awestruck by his process, because he, the planning, the effort that went into this mural. It took him over a year to complete. He would hire models. He would have lighting. He would build models out of clay, and then he would just keep scaling it up until he was full size. And it was just amazing, because my process is so much different than that. I tend to I work faster. I work unplanned. I work basically I'm emotion based, as I was talking about earlier, where the idea of spending 6 months on a painting, I don't know that I could do that. I think I would be so eager to be at something else by that time. You know, as they say, every artist has their own process. I read about Andrew Wyeth and the time it took with his tempera paintings, like Christine's World, where each one of those, you know, stalks of wheat or grass in that field are, you know, just he would paint inches a day. You know, it was that intricate. He also wanted to know if I had multiple paintings working at a time. And I would have to say, yeah, I often have a number of paintings working at a time. Sometimes I will get to a point in a painting where I know where I want to go with it, and I'm just not ready to go yet. So I'll put it aside, because sometimes I want to do what I want to do, and at that moment. And sometimes I feel like doing other things, like working at other parts of different paintings. So I'll set it aside and come back to it at a later time. And then sometimes I've had paintings that have sat for a year before I go back to them. And because sometimes I lose my own enthusiasm for it. And I'll come back later and I will somehow regain it. It's there. It's a mystery. And Dave also wanted to know, there's at Marlin Stadium, this is a baseball stadium in Florida, Miami. There's a huge sculpture out in center field by Red Grooms, contemporary sculptor. Kind of I wouldn't say he's controversial, but you either like him or you don't. It's that kind of stuff. And this is a very colorful sculpture called Homer. And it's like it's got to be 30, 40 foot tall. And it has all kinds of color. It's got marlins, it's got flamingos. It's a really kind of a crazy piece. And he asked if what I thought of that. And I think for what it is and where it is, it's wonderful. Do I want it in my house? No. But, you know, I have no problem with Red Groom's work. I think it's kind of a neat piece. And I hope I answered these questions the way you know, to your satisfaction, Dave. If not, drop me a line and I'll go into a little more detail on those. Now John McDowell had asked about Tempus Quietus. He also wanted to, let's see if we can do this. These flower beds in these paintings. He wanted to know if they were based on anything from like quarantine gardens, anything of that nature. And actually, I had started doing these quite some time ago, and they really didn't have anything to do, with quarantine gardens. I mean, I think I could see where people would connect that to them for themselves, and that's fine. I love for me, they're interesting to paint. I love the feeling that it gives off the front of the painting. It kind of goes back to my archaeology series where you had a regular painting on top, my normal painting, and underneath you had all of these layers of artifacts. This is almost similar to that. When you look at it across the room, you know that it's, one of my pieces. And then when you get up close, you get all of these little gems jumping out at you. And he also wanted to know, do I feel pressure preparing for a show? Nah, I am as calm as a cucumber. No, I'm in a constant state of anxiety. If anything, that anxiety is inspiring, and that sounds counterintuitive, but just knowing that you've got a show coming up, that people are going to be looking at your work. It creates its own sense of purpose, and there's this people-pleasing aspect that comes from that, where you don't want to let people down, so you want to do your best. So I mean, you do feel pressure, but it's a good pressure. Real pressure is not having anybody, doing this gallery talk and having just Jess and me here, with nobody watching. Do I have a favorite style or piece of work? Boy, that's a tough one, because like I say, they all have some kind of, if I'm showing the work, it means something to me. I wouldn't want to show something that I couldn't vouch for. Many years ago, I was a car salesman. A lot of you have heard these stories, and I was a terrible used car salesman, because I couldn't sell anything that I wouldn't buy myself. And as a result, I think I sold a handful of used cars in the couple of years I worked in that business, just because I couldn't sell cars that I didn't really believe in. I didn't want to lie to people about it, and that carries through. I want to be very honest about my work. Anything that I show is a reflection of myself, so it all has something. I hope that works for you, John. Now, there's another question from Mike Royce, who wants to know if I have a favorite of my own, which goes to that same answer. Now, there are pieces that I consider personal pieces that I do solely for myself, and I don't really care if people react strongly to them or buy them or not. The Multitudes pieces from last year were among my favorites. The faces kind of just fields of faces, because they felt very much part of me, and their faces and things that I'd been looking at for most of my life. Uh, it's a tough question. Thanks, Mike. And Julie, hi Julie. I hope you're still there. Julie has a couple of very prominent pieces. Some of my favorites, like Sugar and Water, is one of them. It was a piece that was part of my show at the Fenimore Museum. It's just a large, great piece. That's a piece that I think is a very special piece. Going back to Mike Royce's question, the prior question, it's a piece that I think is very strong and has its own. But she wants to know. I write a lot on my blog about the music that I listen to, and she wanted to know what music I gravitated to this year, and it's all over the place. It's all over the place. I've actually been going back to music that I used to paint with 25 years ago. And it's a classical piece from Arvo Part, Tabula Rasa. It's something that I used to listen to all the time, and I've been listening to it a lot recently. It's just, it's getting me back into big spaces, and that's what I'm hoping to move into big spaces again with my work. From Jennifer, boy, I hope I say your name right, Jennifer. Is that Wasker? What brought about the introduction of people in your work? Typically, we don't see them in your pieces. And that's actually a good observation. I've often said that once you put a person in your painting, it becomes the focus of the painting. And so most of the time I resist, but if I feel that a single individual tells the story, carries the emotion of the piece, then I'll do that. And I've done that for years, but just not on a wide basis. There's always a handful of pieces a year where I will have these, and they're usually small, kind of just little figures. A friend of mine down in Virginia used to call them the Little Prince pieces. She called them the Little Prince. This is from Liz Barella. Curious as to what inspired the unique technique for the sky in Angel's Reach. Now, let's see if I can turn it around here. We'll come over here. Now, Angel's Reach, as you can see, has these slashes throughout the sky. I often use daubs or lines or whatever suits the piece. I like the slashes in that piece because it creates this real vibrant energy. That is the one thing I've found with that particular mark. Painting is all about making marks, and that particular mark it's a mark of motion. You're basically slashing. Hey, that's kind of neat. I get to. But that's I wanted that kind of energy. I talk about how I often see the sky as being this energy source. We have all of these different energies flowing through the sky that we can't see. Radio waves, for instance. If you have the right kind of receiver, you can pick up, signals that are there that you or I don't know about. And that's, in a really poor description, that's kind of what that's about. I hope that answers your question, Liz. This is from Al Tucker. He asked in these times, which is the piece that had the squiggly lines around the sun, one of the darker pieces from the show, and that was from dark to light. That was a dark to light process. Now, generally, my canvases either start, your canvas is paper, board, whatever I'm painting on. They start one of two ways. They either start with a white canvas, like that back there. I guess I will never get a job as a weatherman. Or I would take that white canvas and either I would work with a transparent inks on that, or I would paint it with black paint and then work from bright colors out from that. That's what an additive piece is, Brian. Brian Pappalardo asked that question. Hi, Brian. Additive means I'm strictly adding paint. I'm not putting paint on and then taking some off. You know, it's just, see, when I first started, I painted what I called reductively, which is putting a lot of wet paint on, like a flat surface, and then lifting it off with brushes or rags and revealing the white underneath. That's what I call reductive. Where here you're dealing from a dark surface and you're adding light. There you're adding darkness and then taking it away to reveal light. How long does it take you to do a painting? This is from Mary Passage. Do you start with a vision or idea? Does it come to you as you work? It takes, I do paintings every 7 to 8 minutes. No, that's a really tough question. A painting can take, you can work on it for months, or probably the story that I use best to illustrate this is a piece I did quite a few years ago. There was a diplomat from Finland. This was down in Alexandria. They were from the DC, the embassy in Finland. And they saw a piece at the principal gallery that they liked. It was a larger piece. And, but they didn't want a large piece. They wanted to know if I could do a smaller version. Now, the way I work, especially at that time with the reductive work, because it's so dependent on so many different things. Even something as simple as humidity changed the way a painting would come out for me. But I said, yeah, I would try. I couldn't guarantee that it would come out the same. But I worked for about a month doing a number of iterations. And I finally got it down to where it came out beautifully, of this smaller version of this large painting. And then after I did that, I got up one day about 5 in the morning in the studio, and I had a large panel ready, like a 40 by 45 panel, all prepped with gesso and surface. And by 7 o'clock, this painting was done. And the neat thing was I didn't have to think about painting this at all. It was all muscle memory. It was like I was a musician who had been rehearsing for a month for this one performance. Everything was preordained. It was just, you know, boom, 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 boom. I didn't have to step back and consider anything. Now, you know, you could say, well, you painted that in 2 hours. It takes you 2 hours to paint a painting. That is the rarity. It actually took me a month to paint that painting. I couldn't have been able to finish it anywhere. If I just started with a 40 by 45 panel and set out to paint that, it would have taken me, you know, probably days to do that same thing from the beginning. And it probably wouldn't have had the same vibrancy that it did. As far as starting with a vision or an idea, sometimes you have an idea, sometimes you think you know where it's going, but often you're mistaken, and generally it'll tell you where it wants to go. When you try to force it, at least in my process, it doesn't work well. I've often said that we're not as smart as we think we are, and you know, art is very intuitive. It sees things that we can't put together in the same way. I mean, that's a really hard thing to describe, and I know I kind of botched up that answer, and let me think about that one. From Peter Lindstrom, very much like Eyes of the Night. Oh, okay. Eyes of the Night isn't here. That was a piece that was sold earlier. He said, I very much like Eyes of the Night. The night coloration and texture is so different than other pieces of your work. I love the addition of what looks to be a crow or raven that gives it a sinister look, similar to the piece I purchased, The Night Watchers. Oh, okay. Will you be doing other pieces in the future that include a touch of unexpected animal life? Yeah, I've used the raven or the crow a number of times. I'm a big fan of crows. One of my favorite stories is years ago we had I found a crow, these crow tracks in the snow, and they walked for, all the way down our long driveway. And I couldn't figure out why this crow was walking in the snow. And then one day into my driveway, this is about a quarter of a mile away, it had walked. I could see there was this crow walking in the snow, and he had his wing was all bent out of shape. It was broke, or looked to be broke. And he came for several weeks. And the interesting thing was, as he would come, he would have another crow ahead of him and another one behind him. And it was like they were looking at as lookouts for him. And eventually he got to the point where he could hop up into the low branches of the white pines that we have and the hemlocks. And he would hop up higher and higher and higher. And his wing got to the point where it was healed, where he couldn't fly completely, but he could hop up and then he could glide. And he would move around that way. And eventually he got to the point where his wing healed and he flew. I'm always amazed at the brain of the crow. The crow is a pretty sharp animal. Wendy Hovey. She asked, your style is so unique. Have you always painted in this style, or how did it evolve? Yeah, when I first started painting, I tried painting like other people, and that was fine, because that's how you gauge yourself. This looks like this. I'm doing pretty well. This looks like this. And then all of a sudden, at a certain point, I realized I don't want to look like somebody else. I mean, it's a great gauge if that's your end goal, is to just look like somebody else's work. If you go into any gallery or a museum, it's the people that you look across the space and you know whose work it is that stands out. That's the work that you gravitate towards, because they've got a unique vision, a unique voice, and you tend to identify that and gravitate towards that. And that's kind of how that came about. And I became determined to do something that reflected what I was doing. I hope that answers your question. Brian McDonald wants to know, how has the pandemic affected you as an artist? How has it affected me as a person? As an artist, it is harder to get started. I think I talked a little bit about that. you're so affected by the outer world, the pandemic and the world of politics taking place right now, that it's a huge distraction. It really pulls your focus. It keeps me from going inside as much as I would like. As a person, even though I'm a solitary person, it's maybe even more solitary. I have a hard time leaving my property. I mean, I've always had a problem with that. This, to be here in the gallery today is a big deal. I don't go out very much at all, and I'm less tolerant of the actions of how would I put it? Careless and stupid people. Before I would just kind of shake my head and go, oh, well. Now it's like, oh, I'm a little more angry when I see people doing foolish and silly things. Charlene Brusso, hi Charlene, if you're still there. She'd like to know how I came to show my work here at the West End. You know what I'm going to do, Charlene? At some point here in the future, I'll do a short video from my studio about that. How would that be? We're running a little late on time here. Am I right? Yeah, we're at 2:38. And this, this way I can give you the whole story, and we'll have it down, ready to roll. Would that be okay? And I think we've answered all those questions. Well, let's call this a day. I want to thank you all again for taking your time. Oh, is there one over there? Oh my gosh, there are more. Hi. Two more questions, real quick. Gary Boyd. Hi, Gary. How you doing? How are things down in Texas? I bet it's hot down there today. How did you come to do the 3D effect in the red tree canopies? It's basically just, well, for me, it was just trial and error. And you're basically just modeling little blocks of color. It would be kind of like making a tree full of balls, and you're just painting shadows and things on the balls. But it was trial and error. And everything with me is trial and error. I have a real long learning curve. It takes me a lot longer to get to a certain point than other people. I figure in about 30 more years, I'll be creaking a lot, but I'll be where I want to be. Thanks for tuning in, by the way, Gary. I appreciate it. As comfortable as you are with being alone, this is from Christy. Has forced social distancing made you more or less comfortable with the idea of togetherness? Well, that goes back to the other question. That's a tough question. Forced social distancing. It's funny, I've talked to other people who are that are more social people than I am. Because quite honestly, I'm not a tremendously social person anyhow. So in the early days of the pandemic, I would often joke that, this is welcome to my world. This is a piece of cake. I social distance every day. But I was talking with a friend who, goes out to dinner a lot with clients and things like that. And she was saying how this was actually a relief for her, because so many times she was spending so much time with people that didn't have a lot of meaning in her life. And so now the people that she was spending time with were people that had meaning in her life. And I think maybe that's the thing. You learn, being together is not necessarily togetherness. You know, there are different forms of togetherness, and that's might be the message that I take from that. I don't know if that answers your question, Christy, but I hope it does. All right. Okay, now we're going to call it a day. Thank you again. I so appreciate it. I hope this has been somewhat decent for you. I can't tell. Next time we're going to have this down to thank you again. And